My son Julian cut off my access to the bank account and expected me to come crawling back on my knees begging for help. A month passed, and I did not call even once. When he finally drove over to my place and saw whose car was parked in front of the gate, his legs began to tremble. But let me tell you how this all started. I was standing in line at the grocery store with a full cart. I had chosen every product with care, calculating the prices as I always did. Because even though there was money in that account, I never stopped being the woman who learned how to stretch every single dollar. I scanned the vegetables, the chicken, the laundry detergent, the medicine for my blood pressure. The cashier smiled and stated the total, $143.20. I swiped my card through the reader. I waited. The machine emitted a dry buzzing sound. Declined. The cashier frowned. I tried again. Declined again. I felt the blood rushing to my face. The people behind me started shifting restlessly. Someone sighed with impatience. The cashier looked at me with that mixture of pity and annoyance that I will never forget. I had to leave the cart there full and walk out with empty hands and my head down. I arrived home shaking, not from the cold, but from a humiliation that burned me from the inside out. I tried to log into the banking app on my phone. Incorrect username or password. I called the bank. The automated voice asked me to verify my identity. After 10 minutes of waiting on hold, a young woman explained to me with a professional and distant voice that my access to the account had been modified. Only the primary account holder could make changes now. Julian, my son Julian, who had insisted 2 years ago that we put everything in his name to make things easier so that I would not have to worry about anything. How foolish I was. How blind. How naive to believe that my own son, the creature I carried in my womb, whom I nursed, whom I raised alone after his father abandoned us, would ever do something like this to me. I hung up the call and sat on the armchair in the living room, that same armchair where Julian sat as a child to watch cartoons, while I came home from my second job with swollen feet. I looked around the walls of this small apartment, which I paid for with years of housekeeping, with double shifts at the diner, with every coin I saved, by denying myself everything that was not strictly necessary, all so that he could study, all so that he could have what I never had. And now I was there without access to my own money, without being able to buy my own food, without being able to pay for my own medication. I picked up the phone. I looked for his number. My finger hovered over the screen. I almost dialed. I almost called him to ask what had happened, to beg him, to explain, to plead with him to fix the error. But something inside me, something small but firm like a stone, stopped me, because it was not an error. I knew it in that instant with a clarity that pierced my chest. Julian knew exactly what he was doing. He had cut off my access, expecting me to run to him, desperate, humiliated, begging for his help, expecting to see me on my knees, expecting to have that power over me, over his own mother. I put the phone away. I was not going to give him that satisfaction. Not yet. Maybe never. I got up from the armchair and walked to the kitchen. I opened the pantry. There was rice, beans, a little oil salt. I could survive a few days on that. I had survived worse things. I had survived the abandonment of his father. I had survived the poverty that forced me to wash other people's clothes until my hands bled. I had survived sleepless nights sewing uniforms to earn a few extra dollars. I had survived everything, and I would survive this too. That night, I could not sleep. I lay there staring at the dark ceiling, listening to the hum of the old refrigerator, feeling my mind replay every moment of the last few months. The signs had been there. I simply did not want to see them. The visits that became more and more spaced out. The calls that became shorter, colder. The way Julian averted his gaze when I spoke. The way his wife, that woman who never looked at me with true affection, smiled smugly every time she saw me. The forgotten birthdays, the broken promises, the Mother's Day that passed without a single word from him. I remembered the last time I went to his house 3 months ago. I had baked his favorite cake, that chocolate, one I made when he was a child that always brought a smile to his face. I rang the doorbell. His wife opened the door with an annoyed expression. She told me they were busy, that I should have called ahead, that it was not a good time. I saw Julian behind her in the spacious living room of that house that I helped pay for when he was starting out. He did not get up. He did not come to greet me. He only raised his hand in a vague gesture and went back to looking at his phone. I stood there on the threshold holding that cake like an idiot. Feeling the rejection hit me in the chest. I murmured an apology and left. I walked the 4 blocks to the bus stop with the cake in my hands and tears stinging my eyes. But even then, even after that humiliation, I had found excuses. They are stressed. They have a lot of responsibilities. Life is hard for them too. What stupidity. What tremendous stupidity of mine to justify the unjustifiable, to swallow the pain and call it love, to accept crumbs and call them enough. Now lying in my bed in the dark, I understood the truth. Julian had not cut off my access to the account by mistake or by carelessness. He had done it because he wanted control, because he wanted to see me weak, because at some point in his life, my son, my boy, had become someone capable of punishing his own mother for the simple fact of existing. I closed my eyes, and an image appeared in my mind. Julian at 7 years old crying because the kids at school made fun of his torn shoes. Me kneeling in front of him, drying his tears, and promising him that he would soon have new shoes. I worked 3 straight shifts that week. I cleaned bathrooms, floors, windows. I came home every night with my body destroyed. But on Friday, I put a pair of new shoes on his bed. He jumped with joy. He hugged me. He told me I was the best mom in the world. That boy no longer existed. The man he had become was a stranger, a cruel stranger. The following days were a parade of memories that I had buried under layers of excuses and blind hope. Every time I closed my eyes, a different scene appeared. One more piece of the puzzle that I had refused to put together. I remembered Christmas last year. I had saved for months to buy Julian that watch he wanted so much. An elegant watch, one of those that important businessmen wear. It cost me $300. $300. That meant skipping meals, walking instead of taking the bus, not buying the coat I needed for the winter. I wrapped it with the prettiest paper I found. I arrived at his house on the afternoon of December 24th with the gift in my hands and a nervous smile on my face. His wife opened the door. She looked me up and down with that barely disguised contempt that was already familiar to me. She let me in, but she did not invite me to sit down. I remained standing in the entryway while she shouted toward the 2nd floor that I had arrived. Julian came down the stairs reluctantly, as if my presence were an inconvenience in his perfect day. I gave him the gift. He opened it without looking me in the eyes. When he saw the watch, he barely murmured a dry thank you. His wife leaned in and said they already had 3 identical watches in the drawer. They laughed. Both of them laughed. Julian did not even bother to pretend he liked it. He told me they had plans that I should go. He did not offer me anything to drink. He did not ask me how I had gotten there. He did not wish me a Merry Christmas. I left that house with my heart broken in pieces. But even so, I told myself that maybe I was being too sensitive, that maybe they really were busy, that maybe I expected too much lies. Everything was lies. I told myself to avoid facing the truth. I also remembered my 63rd birthday. I waited all day for a call, a single call. I kept the phone close to me every second. I checked it every 5 minutes in case I had missed a notification. The call never came. But that night, while I browsed aimlessly through social media to distract myself from the loneliness, I saw the photos. Julian and his wife at a fancy restaurant smiling, toasting with glasses of wine. The caption said, "Celebrating life and blessings." It was my birthday. And he was celebrating without remembering me. The comments under the photos were from friends congratulating them, asking what they were celebrating. No one mentioned my name. No one knew that it was my birthday that day because to Julian, I no longer existed. I stared at those photos for hours. My son looked so happy, so free, so relieved not to have to pretend he remembered me. I turned off the phone and cried in the darkness of my room until I ran out of tears. I remembered the day I got sick. It was 6 months ago. A bad flu that left me in bed with a high fever and without strength even to get up for water. I called Julian. It rang 5 times before he answered. His voice sounded annoyed. "Busy, Mom. I'm in an important meeting." I explained to him that I felt very bad that I could not even get up. There was a long silence. Then he told me to drink hot tea and rest. That was all. He did not come to see me. He did not call back to know how I was doing. He did not send even a text message. It was 5 days of fever. 5 days in which my neighbor Margaret, a woman I barely knew, was the one who knocked on my door every morning with a thermos of hot soup and medicines she bought with her own money. She, who owed me nothing. She, who had no obligation to me. While my own son did not lift a finger. When I finally recovered and called him to tell him I was better, he responded with a distracted, "That's good, Mom," as if he were talking about the weather, as if I were a distant acquaintance and not the woman who brought him into the world. I remembered the times I asked him for help with simple things. A jar I couldn't open, a light bulb that needed changing on the high ceiling, a heavy piece of furniture that had to be moved. He always had an excuse. He was always busy. It was always tomorrow. "Mom, I can't today." That tomorrow never came. But when he needed money for the down payment on his house, I did not hesitate for a second. I gave him my savings, $12,000 that I had saved for my old age for emergencies to feel safe. I gave them to him without thinking twice because he was my son, because I trusted him, because he promised me he would pay them back in 6 months. 3 years have passed. I haven't seen a single dollar back, and now I understood why. Julian never had any intention of paying me back. He knew that I would never claim them from him. He knew that he could take and take without giving anything in return. Because mothers forgive. Because mothers forget. Because mothers keep loving even when they are treated like garbage. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of cold tea in my hands. I looked at the walls of this apartment full of memories. Photos of Julian at every stage of his life. His first day of school, his graduation, his wedding. In all the photos, I was there always by his side, always smiling, always proud. But in real life, I had ceased to exist for him a long time ago. The truth hit me with brutal force. Julian had not forgotten me by accident. He was not too busy. It wasn't that life had him absorbed. He had decided to erase me. He had decided that I was a burden, an uncomfortable reminder of his humble past, an embarrassment he preferred to keep far from his new life of success and appearances. And I, like a fool, had allowed every slight. I had justified every rejection. I had swallowed every humiliation with a smile and an, "It's okay, son, I understand." But no more. Something broke inside me that night. It wasn't my heart that had been broken a long time ago. It was the invisible chain that tied me to the need for his approval, to the hope that someday he would go back to being the boy who hugged me and told me I was his favorite person in the world. That boy was dead, and I had to accept it. I got up from the table and walked to my room. I opened the drawer where I kept the old photos. There it was, a photograph of Julian at 5 years old, sitting on my lap, smiling with that toothless smile that melted my heart. I held it between my trembling fingers. A tear fell on the glossy paper. This boy loved me. This boy needed me. This boy saw me as his hero. But that boy no longer existed, and the man he turned into did not deserve even one more tear. I put the photo back in the drawer. I closed the drawer firmly, and I made a decision. I was not going to call him. I was not going to beg him. I was not going to give him the pleasure of seeing me broken. If Julian wanted to play this cruel game of power and control, let him play alone. I was no longer going to participate. The first week without calling him was the hardest of my life. Every morning, I woke up with the impulse to grab the phone to dial his number, to listen to his voice, even if it was cold and distant, because even my son's rejection seemed better than this absolute silence that surrounded me. But every time my hand approached the phone, I remembered the humiliation at the supermarket. I remembered his laugh when he saw the watch I gave him. I remembered how he left me sick and alone for 5 days without even asking if I was still alive. And then I would push the phone away and breathe deeply. The days dragged on slow and heavy. I sat by the window watching the street. I saw mothers pass by with their children. I saw them laughing together. I saw them hugging. And I felt a pain so deep in my chest that sometimes it was hard to breathe. But I did not call. The rice and beans were running out. I counted what was left, maybe for 4 more days if I ate small portions. I opened my wallet, $22 in cash. That was all I had in the world, $22 and a son who expected to see me crawling back to him. I sat on the edge of my bed and let reality crash over me like a cold wave. I was alone, completely alone. At 64 years old, without money, without access to my account, without anyone to turn to, fear settled in my stomach like a frozen stone. I could die here, and Julian wouldn't find out until someone reported the smell. I could get sick again, and there would be no one to knock on my door. I could scream and no one would hear me. The tears began to fall uncontrollably. I cried like I hadn't cried since I was a little girl. I cried for the mother I was. I cried for the sacrifices I made. I cried for the love I gave. And that was never enough. I cried for the woman who was now sitting on this bed, invisible and forgotten. But at some point in the middle of that heartbreaking crying, something changed. The crying stopped. The tears dried up. And in their place appeared something different, something I hadn't felt in a long time. Rage. Not the explosive rage that breaks things, not the rage that screams and curses. It was a cold rage, silent, firm as steel. I got up from the bed, I looked at myself in the vanity mirror. I saw an older woman with a face swollen from crying and red eyes. But I also saw something else. I saw a woman who had survived things that would have destroyed others. I raised a son alone. I worked 3 jobs at the same time. I paid every bill. I kept a roof over our heads. I fed him even when I went without eating. I clothed him even when I wore old and mended clothes. I built a human being from scratch. I gave him education values, opportunities, and if I could do all that back then when I was younger but also poorer and more scared, then I could survive this. Now Julian was waiting for my desperate call. He was waiting for me to beg, to plead, to show him that without him, I was nothing. But he was wrong. I washed my face with cold water. I combed my hair. I put on the only decent blouse I had left. And I went out to the street. I walked 4 blocks to my neighbor Margaret's house, the same woman who had taken care of me when I was sick. I knocked on her door with my heart beating hard in my chest. She opened it with a warm smile. She invited me in. She made me a coffee without me asking. She sat across from me in her small kitchen and waited for me to speak. I told her everything. I told her about the bank account. I told her about the grocery store. I told her about Julian and his cruel silence. I told her about the $22 I had left and the food that was running out. Margaret listened to me in silence. When I finished speaking, she took my hand in hers. She didn't tell me that Julian surely had his reasons. She didn't tell me that children sometimes get confused. She didn't tell me any of those empty phrases people say to fill the uncomfortable silence. Instead, she told me, "Eleanor, you don't need that boy. You are stronger than you think." Then she got up and came back with an envelope. Inside was $150. She told me it was a loan with no rush to repay, to buy food, to pay what I needed. That when I could pay her back, I would. But not to worry about that now. I tried to refuse it. It seemed like too much. It seemed like charity. It seemed humiliating to accept money from a neighbor when my own son had left me with nothing. But Margaret closed my fingers over the envelope and looked me in the eyes. Accepting help isn't weakness, Eleanor. It's intelligence. I went back home with those $150 pressed against my chest. It wasn't much, but it was something. It was the difference between eating and going hungry, between surviving and giving up. That night, I slept a little better. The next day, I went to the grocery store. I bought the basics, no luxuries. Rice, beans, eggs, bread, milk, cheap vegetables. I calculated every penny. I stretched every dollar as far as I could. When the cashier scanned my products and said the total, I took out the cash with trembling hands. I paid. I took my bags and I walked out of there with my head held high. Small victory, but a victory nonetheless. The following days, I established a routine. I got up early. I did gentle exercise at home to stay active. I cooked my meals with care. I cleaned the apartment even though no one would come to visit, because if I stopped taking care of myself, if I gave up, then Julian would have won, and I wasn't going to allow it. One afternoon while I was washing the dishes, I heard someone knocking on the door. My heart jumped for a stupid second. I thought it might be Julian, that he had come to apologize, that he had come to his senses. I opened the door. It wasn't Julian. It was a man I didn't recognize at first. Tall, about 50 years old, well-dressed, but without showing off. He looked at me with a strange expression, a mixture of surprise and something like relief. Mrs. Ellen or Vance? He asked with a soft voice. Yes, I responded cautiously. Who is asking? The man smiled. I don't know if you remember me. I'm Caleb Bennett. The name sounded vaguely familiar, but I couldn't place it. He must have noticed my confusion because he continued speaking. You helped me 15 years ago. I was a boy who had just arrived in the city. I had nowhere to sleep. I had no money. I was desperately looking for a job. You saw me sitting at the bus stop in the rain. You invited me into your house. You gave me food. You let me sleep on your sofa for 2 weeks until I got a job. The memories began to return. A young boy, thin, with frightened eyes and soaked clothes. I remembered him. I had given him a bowl of hot soup and a blanket. Julian was a teenager then, and had complained about having a stranger in the house, but I told him that helping a neighbor wasn't optional. Caleb, I murmured. Yes, I remember you. He nodded. Mrs. Eleanor, I never forgot what you did for me. You didn't know me at all. You had no reason to trust me. But you did. You treated me with dignity when the rest of the world looked at me like garbage. It was nothing I said lowering my gaze. Anyone would have done the same. That's not true, he responded firmly. No one else did. Only you. There was an uncomfortable silence. I didn't know what to say. Caleb continued, I've been looking for you for months. I wanted to thank you personally. I wanted you to know that thanks to that opportunity you gave me, I was able to build a life. Now I have my own business. I'm doing well. Very well. I'm happy for you, I said sincerely, but when I finally found you, I started asking some questions. And I found out things that worried me a lot, Mrs. Eleanor. My body tensed. What things I found out: that your son cut off your access to your own accounts, that he left you without resources, that you are going through difficulties. I felt shame burning my cheeks. That's none of your business, I murmured. You're right, he said. It's not my business. But I have a debt to you, a debt I can never fully repay. So let me help you now. I don't need charity. I responded more harshly than I intended. It's not charity, Mrs. Eleanor. It's justice. Caleb Bennett didn't wait for my answer. He took a business card out of his wallet and extended it to me. It said, Caleb Bennett, financial advisor and legal consultant. Tomorrow at 10 hours in the morning, I have an appointment with a lawyer friend of mine. He said calmly, I would like you to come with me. We need to review your financial situation, see what options you have, what rights correspond to you. I shook my head. I don't have money for lawyers. I'm not charging you anything. He responded, I'm doing this because I want to, because I must, because 15 years ago, you gave me something priceless, dignity and hope. Now let me give you back even a fraction of that. I wanted to refuse. I wanted to tell him I could do it alone. But the truth was that I couldn't. The truth was that I was desperate. And the truth was that maybe this was the sign I had been waiting for without knowing it. Okay, I whispered finally. I'll go. Caleb smiled. I'll pick you up at 9:30, and Mrs. Eleanor, this is going to get better, I promise you. He left before I could answer. I remained standing there in the doorway holding his card between my fingers, feeling that something was changing. I didn't know exactly what, but something was moving in the shadows of my life. That night, I almost didn't sleep. I tossed and turned in bed, thinking about what a lawyer could do, about what rights I could have, about whether there was any way to recover even something of what Julian had taken from me. At 9 in the morning, I was already dressed and ready. I put on my best dress, the one I saved for special occasions. I applied light makeup. I combed my hair with care. I wanted to look dignified. I wanted to look strong. Caleb arrived punctually in an elegant car. He opened the passenger door for me like a true gentleman. During the ride, he asked me basic things. How had I been these years? Was I still living in the same apartment? Did I need anything urgent? I told him the essentials. I didn't go into details about Julian. It still hurt too much to talk about that naturally. We arrived at a modern building downtown. We went up to the 5th floor. The office was spacious and bright. On the door it said, Arthur Richardson family and estate attorney, a man of about 60 with gray hair and a kind look, received us with a warm smile. He shook my hand firmly. Mrs. Vance, it is a pleasure to meet you. Caleb has told me a little about your situation. Sit down, please. We are going to review everything calmly. I sat in a comfortable chair across from his desk. Caleb sat next to me. Arthur opened a notebook and took a pen. Tell me from the beginning, he said with a soft voice. What exactly happened with your bank account? I took a deep breath and began to speak. I told him how Julian had convinced me to put everything in his name, how he had promised me it was to make things easier, how I had trusted him blindly. I told him about the day at the supermarket, about the call to the bank, about the month I had spent without access to my own money. Arthur listened, taking notes. From time to time, he asked specific questions. Since when was the account in Julian's name? Had I signed any documents? Was there any proof that I had contributed to that money? I explained that my late husband's widow's pension was deposited into that account, that I had also contributed my savings, that technically part of that money was legally mine. Arthur nodded slowly. This is financial abuse, he said with a firm voice, and potentially it is a crime. Your son cannot simply cut off your access to funds that legally belong to you, especially if your pension is deposited there. I felt something stir in my chest. You mean I can do something? Not only can you, Mrs. Vance, you must. This is a violation of your rights, and there are legal ways to recover what is yours. But he is my son, I murmured. I don't want to get him in trouble. Arthur looked at me with a mixture of compassion and firmness. Mrs. Vance, your son, left you without money to eat. He left you without access to your medication. He put you in a situation of extreme vulnerability. He is already in trouble that he created himself. Tears began to well up in my eyes. I couldn't avoid it. All this was too much, too real, too painful. Caleb handed me a tissue. Arthur waited patiently for me to compose myself. What do I need to do? I asked finally with a trembling voice. Arthur leaned back in his chair. First, we are going to request your bank records. We are going to prove that you have a legal right to those funds. Then we are going to send a formal letter to your son demanding that he restore your access immediately. If he refuses, we will proceed legally. And if he says the money is his, that I have no right to anything, then we will go to court. And believe me, Mrs. Vance, judges do not look kindly on children who financially abuse their elderly parents. especially when there is clear evidence that you contributed to those funds. But that will take time, I said, feeling overwhelmed. And I need money now to eat to survive. Arthur looked at Caleb. Caleb nodded as if they had discussed this previously. We already thought of that, Caleb said. While the legal matters are resolved, I am going to help you with your basic expenses. It is not a loan, it is a gift, and I will not accept a no for an answer. I tried to protest, but Caleb raised his hand. Mrs. Eleanor, you gave me shelter and food when I had nothing. You treated me as if I were your own son. Let me do this, please. I didn't know what to say. The words got stuck in my throat. I could only nod while tears ran down my cheeks. Arthur continued explaining the process to me, the documents I would need, the steps to follow. Everything sounded complicated, but he explained with patience, making sure I understood every detail. He also mentioned something that surprised me. Mrs. Vance, I need to ask you something important. Did you ever lend money to your son, $12,000 for the down payment on his house specifically? How did you know that? I asked, astonished. I made some inquiries, Caleb responded. I spoke with some people who know you and that information came to light. Yes, I lent him that money. I confirmed 3 years ago. He promised to pay it back in 6 months. He never did. Do you have any document that proves that loan, a contract, a receipt? Something? I shook my head, ashamed. No, I trusted his word. He was my son. Arthur sighed. That complicates things. Without written proof, it is difficult to recover that money, but we can try to include it in the general lawsuit. Sometimes children confess these things when they are under legal pressure. We spent 2 more hours in that office. I signed documents authorizing Arthur to request my bank records. I signed a power of attorney letter so he could act on my behalf. I signed everything they put in front of me because for the first time in weeks, I felt that someone was on my side. When we left the building, the sun was shining brightly. Caleb took me to lunch at a modest but cozy restaurant. He ordered for both of us without asking me what I wanted, as if he knew I was too emotionally exhausted to make decisions. We ate in silence for a while. Then Caleb spoke. Mrs. Eleanor, I know this is difficult. I know that confronting your son legally is probably the last thing you wanted to do in life. It is, I admitted. I never thought it would come to this. But you deserve respect. You deserve dignity, and you deserve to have access to your own money. What Julian did is not only cruel, it is illegal. I know I whispered, but he is still my son, and you are still his mother, a mother who sacrificed everything for him, a mother who deserves something better than this. We finished eating. Caleb paid the bill despite my protests. Then he handed me an envelope. There are $2,000 in there, he said before I could speak. Use them for whatever you need. Food, medicine bills, whatever. And don't worry about paying them back. When this is resolved and you recover your money, if you want to give me something, fine. If not, that's fine too. Caleb, this is too much, I said with a broken voice. Nothing is too much for the woman who saved my life, he responded firmly. He took me back home. Before I got out of the car, he gave me a phone number. It's my personal cell phone. Call me if you need anything. At any hour, I mean it. I entered my apartment with the envelope pressed against my chest. I closed the door. I leaned against it. And finally, after weeks of pain and fear, I felt something different. Hope. The following days were a whirlwind of activity that I hadn't experienced in a long time. I felt useful, busy, alive in a way I had forgotten was possible. Arthur called me 3 days after our meeting. His voice sounded satisfied. Mrs. Vance, I have good news. I got the bank records for the last 5 years. And what do they say? I asked with a racing heart. They say you have a solid case. Your pension has been deposited into that account religiously every month. It is $1 $200 a month for 5 years. That is $72,000 that entered that account and are legally yours. $72,000. The figure left me breathless. I had never thought of that money in that way. I had never added it up. I only knew that my pension arrived and that Julian supposedly used it to help me with my expenses. But now I realized that I barely saw any of that money. Julian gave me $200 a month when he remembered. Sometimes less, sometimes nothing. Where was the rest of my money? That is the right question, said Arthur. The records show that Julian has been spending freely from that account. Expensive restaurants trips, luxury purchases. There is a charge of $8,000 to a jewelry store 6 months ago, another of $15,000 to a travel agency a year ago. I felt the rage returning cold hard. Julian had been living well on my money while I counted pennies to buy rice. There is also something else, continued Arthur. I found evidence that you deposited your own savings into that account, $12,500 4 years ago, money you had earned working before retiring. Yes, I said with a trembling voice. It was when Julian convinced me to merge everything into a single account so it would be easier to manage. He said that way he could help me better with my finances. What he did is called misappropriation of funds. Mrs. Advance and we have all the evidence we need to prove it. What follows now, I asked. Now we send him a formal letter. A letter where we explain that we know exactly what he did, that he has 7 days to restore your full access to the account and to compensate you for the funds he spent improperly. If he doesn't respond or refuses, we proceed with a formal lawsuit. Do it, I said without hesitation. I was no longer afraid. I no longer had doubts. Julian had crossed a line from which there was no return. The letter was sent the next day by certified mail. Arthur told me that Julian would have to sign upon receiving it so we would know exactly when he read it. Meanwhile, Caleb continued visiting me regularly. He brought food, he brought company, he brought stories of his life that made me laugh for the first time in months. He told me how after I gave him shelter 15 years ago, he got a job at an accounting firm. He started from the bottom cleaning the offices, but he was smart and observant. He learned. He studied at night. He got certifications. He moved up the ranks. Now he had his own financial consulting firm. He had employees. He had important clients. He had a life that seemed like it came out of a dream. And it all started because you gave me a chance. He told me one afternoon while we drank coffee in my small kitchen. Because you saw me as a human being when everyone else saw me as a problem. I only did the right thing, I responded, feeling uncomfortable with so much gratitude. Exactly, he said. You did the right thing. Now let me do the right thing too. A week later, Arthur called me with urgency in his voice. Mrs. Vance Julian received the letter 3 days ago and today he responded. What did he say? I asked, feeling my stomach tighten. He is furious. He sent a letter from his own lawyer saying that all the money in that account is legally his, because the account is in his name, that you have no right to those funds, that if we insist on this, he will counter-sue for defamation. It is a common intimidation tactic, continued Arthur. But it is not going to work. We have the evidence. We have the records showing where that money came from, and we have the law on our side. So what do? I asked. We proceed with the formal lawsuit. We go to court, and we are going to win. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not from fear, but from something different. From the certainty that this was really happening, that I was really confronting my own son. That our relationship, what little remained of it, was about to break completely. But there was no turning back anymore. And honestly, I didn't want to turn back anymore. Caleb appeared at my door the next day with something unexpected. A new cell phone more modern than the old one I had. You need a better phone, he said, handing it to me. It's already set up. It already has my number and Arthur's. And I also bought an unlimited data plan so you can call and use the internet without worrying. I tried to refuse it, but he insisted. Besides, he said with a smile, I need you to be able to receive emails because I have something else for you. What is it? I asked, confused. I sat in front of my laptop that he had brought. Caleb opened several documents on the screen. I did a complete investigation of your financial situation, he explained. And I found something interesting. You worked for 25 years for a cleaning company, right? Yes, I confirmed, until I retired 6 years ago. That company had a retirement fund for its employees, a fund to which you contributed automatically from your salary every month. It is a small amount, but over 25 years, it accumulated. I knew nothing about that, I said, surprised. Most employees didn't know Caleb responded. The company didn't make much effort to inform them, but I investigated. I spoke with them, and it turns out you have $8,500 in that fund that you never claimed. $8,500. Another number that seemed unreal. How is it possible they never told me I asked? They sent a letter to your address when you retired, but according to their records, the letter was returned. Probably because you had already moved to this apartment. Caleb took some forms out of his briefcase. You need to sign these documents to claim that money. The process takes approximately 3 weeks, but that money is yours. Legally, without dispute, I signed the papers with trembling hands. I couldn't believe what was happening. Money that I thought I didn't have money that was mine by right money that meant independence. But that's not all, continued Caleb. I also checked if you qualify for any assistance programs for seniors, and it turns out you do. There is a state program that can provide you with an additional $200 a month for medical expenses and food. How did I not know anything about this? I asked, feeling overwhelmed. Why didn't anyone tell me, Mrs. Eleanor? Because probably Julian was never interested in finding out. He wanted you to depend on him to need him because that gave him power. The following days were of intense paperwork signatures, forms, documents. Caleb helped me with everything. Arthur, too. Between the two of them, they were building a legal and financial shield around me. And slowly, very slowly, I began to feel different. I began to feel powerful. 2 weeks later, I received an email on my new phone. It was from the cleaning company where I worked. They confirmed that my application had been approved. The $8,500 would be deposited into my new account. The account Caleb had helped me open at a different bank. An account where only I had access. I cried when I read that email. Not from sadness, from relief, from gratitude, from victory. Caleb called me that same afternoon. I have one more surprise for you, he said with a mysterious voice. I'm going to pick you up tomorrow at 10. Wear something nice. What surprise, I asked. You'll see, he responded and hung up. The next morning, I got ready with care. I put on my best dress, I did my makeup, I did my hair. When Caleb arrived, he whistled with admiration. You look beautiful, Mrs. Eleanor. He took me to a car dealership, an elegant dealership with shiny and gleaming cars. He parked and looked at me with a smile. What are we doing here? I asked, confused. You need transportation, he said simply, and I need to buy a new car. So we are going to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. I don't understand. My current car is only 2 years old. It is in perfect condition. I don't need it anymore. So I am going to give it to you. Caleb, I can't accept a car, I protested. Of course you can, he responded. And you will, because you deserve to move with freedom. You deserve not to depend on buses or anyone. You deserve to have your own transportation. I tried to argue, but he was already getting out of the car. I followed him into the dealership. Half an hour later, we were signing the transfer papers. The car was now in my name. A beautiful car, silver, colored with barely $30,000 mess on it. Caleb handed me the keys. It's yours, Mrs. Eleanor. Enjoy it. I stood in the parking lot of the dealership holding those keys, looking at that car that was now mine. And I felt something I hadn't felt in a long, long time. I felt that my life belonged to me again. Learning to drive that car was like learning to live again. It had been years since I sat behind a steering wheel. When my husband died, I sold our old car because I couldn't pay for the maintenance or the gas. Since then, it had been the bus long walks depending on the goodwill of others to get places. But now I had my own car, my own freedom, on 4 wheels. Caleb accompanied me the first few times. He took me to an empty parking lot where I practiced for hours, starting braking, turning, parking. My hands trembled. At first, I was afraid of crashing, of scratching the car, of making a mistake. But little by little, muscle memory returned. The movements became more natural. Confidence grew. A week later, I dared to drive alone for the first time. I only went to the grocery store that was 10 blocks from my house, but those 10 blocks felt like crossing a continent. I parked, did my shopping, returned to the car with my bags, and when I got home and turned off the engine, I sat in silence for several minutes, smiling like a fool. I had done it alone, without help, without depending on anyone. The days passed and I felt stronger and stronger. The money from the retirement fund had arrived in my account. $500 shining on my phone screen every time I checked the banking app. My money in my account under my control. The approval for the state assistance program had also arrived. $200 additional every month. It wasn't much, but added to my pension that I would soon recover. It meant stability. It meant not having to count every penny with terror. Margaret, my neighbor, noticed the change in me. One day, she invited me for tea at her house and looked at me with that wise smile that women who have lived a lot have. "You look different, Eleanor," she told me. "You look taller, stronger." "I feel different," I admitted. "I feel as if I had been asleep for years and finally woke up." She nodded. "That is what happens when you stop living for others and start living for yourself." Her words stayed with me. She was right. For decades, I had lived for Julian. My decisions, my sacrifices, my dreams, everything had revolved around him. And when he discarded me like garbage, I almost gave up. I almost accepted that without him, I was nothing. But now I knew the truth. I had always been someone, a woman with self-worth, a woman who didn't need her son's validation to exist. Arthur called me on a Tuesday afternoon. "We have a date for the preliminary hearing," he announced. "It will be in 3 weeks. The judge will review the evidence from both sides and decide if there is merit to proceed to trial. Will we be ready?" I asked, with a nervousness I couldn't hide. "More than ready," he responded with confidence. "We have bank documents, records of deposits, evidence of unauthorized expenses. We have a solid case, Mrs. Vance. Julian has no way to justify what he did. And if the judge doesn't believe us," I asked quietly. "He will believe us," said Arthur firmly. "The numbers don't lie. And judges do not tolerate financial abuse of the elderly. Believe me." I hung up the phone and stared out the window. In 3 weeks, I would see Julian face to face. In 3 weeks, I would have to look him in the eyes, knowing that I had taken him to court, knowing that our relationship, if anything was left of it, would be destroyed forever. Part of me still hurt. The part that was a mother. The part that remembered the boy who once hugged me and told me I was his hero. That part wanted to cry, wanted to give up, wanted to call him and say, "Let's forget all this." But the other part of me, the part that had grown and strengthened these last weeks, knew that I couldn't do it. I knew that Julian needed to face the consequences of his actions. And I knew that I deserved justice. I decided to prepare for that encounter. I didn't want to arrive at the courthouse feeling weak or scared. I wanted to arrive feeling powerful. I started taking better care of myself. I walked every morning in the nearby park. I bought nutritious food with the money I now had. I allowed myself small luxuries that I previously considered impossible. A coffee at the corner shop, a magazine, a haircut at a decent salon. I also started writing. I bought a notebook. And every night before sleeping, I wrote my thoughts. I wrote about the pain Julian had caused me, about the years of sacrifice he had forgotten, about the betrayal that still burned in my chest. But I also wrote about my rebirth, about Caleb and his unexpected loyalty, about Margaret and her generous friendship, about Arthur and his tireless defense, about all the people who had shown me that I did matter. Writing helped me sort out my emotions, to see clearly what had happened and what was happening, to mentally prepare for what was coming. A week before the hearing, Caleb came to visit me with a proposal. "Mrs. Eleanor, I know this is going to sound strange, but I want us to rehearse. Rehearse what I asked, confused. The day of the hearing, Arthur is going to ask you questions. Julian's lawyer, too. I want us to practice your answers so you feel secure, so they don't catch you by surprise." We spent the whole afternoon rehearsing. Caleb played the role of the hostile lawyer, throwing difficult questions at me, trying to confuse me to make me doubt. "Isn't it true that you gave your son permission to manage that account as he wished?" he asked with a hard voice. "I gave him permission to help me manage it," I responded with a firm voice. "I didn't give him permission to steal my money. How can you call it theft when the account is legally in his name? Because that money came from my pension, from my work, from my savings. The fact that the account is in his name doesn't change whose money that is." Over and over, we went over the possible questions. Over and over, I practiced maintaining calm, maintaining firmness, not letting myself be intimidated. At the end of the afternoon, Caleb smiled. "You are going to do very well, Mrs. Eleanor. You are going to surprise everyone in that room." 2 days before the hearing, I did something I hadn't done in weeks. I took out the old photos of Julian, the ones I had kept in the drawer, the ones that showed the smiling boy he once was. I looked at them, one by one. Julian, at 3 years old, covered in chocolate. Julian at 8, proudly showing his first soccer trophy. Julian at 15, the day of his middle school graduation. Julian at 22, the day he graduated from college. In every photo, I was there behind him, by his side, holding him, applauding him, loving him. But he no longer saw me. He no longer valued me. He no longer loved me the way a son should love his mother. I put the photos back in the drawer. I closed the drawer gently and I decided I wouldn't take them out again. Not because I wanted to forget, but because I needed to move on. The night before the hearing, I couldn't sleep. I tossed and turned in bed, imagining how it would be, how I would feel, seeing Julian after almost 2 months without contact. What expression would be on his face if he would feel shame, if he would feel regret, if he would feel anything. At 6:00 in the morning, I got up. I showered with hot water, letting the steam fill the bathroom. I dressed in the most elegant suit. I had a gray outfit I had bought at a thrift store, but that looked dignified and professional. I applied makeup carefully, not too much, just enough to look rested and confident. I combed my hair back into an elegant bun. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a woman I didn't fully recognize. A woman with a straight back, with a steady gaze, with a jaw set in determination. This was me now. No longer the pleading mother, no longer the woman who accepted crumbs, no longer the one who apologized for existing. Caleb arrived promptly at 8. He opened the car door for me with an encouraging smile. Arthur was waiting for us at the entrance of the courthouse with his briefcase full of documents. "Are you ready?" he asked me. I took a deep breath. "I'm ready." We entered the building. Our steps echoed in the marble hallways. The air smelled of old paper and pending justice. And then turning a corner, I saw him. Julian was standing in front of the courtroom. He was wearing an expensive suit. Beside him was his lawyer, a tall man with a serious expression. And next to him, his wife looking at me with barely concealed contempt. Our eyes met, and in that moment when I saw the expression on his face, a mixture of shock, rage, and something like fear, I knew I had made the right decision. I wasn't going to back down. I wasn't going to give up. I wasn't going to give him the pleasure of seeing me broken. I raised my chin. I held his gaze without blinking, and I walked toward the courtroom with my head held high. The courtroom was smaller than I had imagined. Cream-colored walls, rows of wooden benches, and at the front, the bench where the judge would sit to decide our fate. Arthur guided me to our table. Caleb sat in the first row behind us, his silent presence comforting. On the other side of the room, Julian took a seat next to his lawyer. He didn't look at me again. He kept his eyes front, his jaw tense, his hands clenched on the table. His wife sat behind him glaring at me as if I were the villain of this story, as if I were the one who had done something wrong. "All rise," announced the bailiff. The judge entered. A man of about 60, completely white hair, serious expression, but not cruel. He sat down and signaled us to do the same. Case number 47328. He read from his computer, Eleanor Vance versus Julian Vance. Dispute over access to funds and misappropriation. Let's proceed. Arthur stood up. With your permission, Your Honor, I would like to present my client's situation first. The judge nodded. Go ahead. Arthur began to speak. His voice was clear, firm, professional. He explained how Julian had convinced me to put the account in his name, how he had cut off my access without notice, how he had left me without resources for basic needs. Then he presented the evidence. The bank records projected on a large screen. The monthly deposits of my pension clearly marked the excessive withdrawals and expenses Julian had made. A charge of $8,300 to a jewelry store pointed out Arthur. Another of $15,200 to a travel agency. Multiple charges at luxury restaurants totaling more than $20,000 in the last year. All this while my client survived on rice and beans. The judge studied the documents with attention. He made notes. From time to time, he looked up at Julian, who sank lower and lower in his chair. We also have evidence, continued Arthur, that Mrs. Vance deposited $2,500 of her own savings into this account 4 years ago. Money she earned working. Money that Mr. Vance has used as if it were his own. Julian's lawyer stood up. Objection, Your Honor. The account is legally in my client's name. He has every right to manage those funds as he deems appropriate. The judge looked at him with a raised eyebrow. Even when those funds come from his elderly mother's pension, even when he left her without access to her own money, even when she needed that money to survive, the lawyer hesitated. Mr. Vance was trying to protect his mother from unnecessary expenses, trying to ensure the money was used wisely by buying $8,000 worth of jewelry. Asked the judge with a dry tone. Is that protection or appropriation? An uncomfortable silence filled the room. The judge turned to Julian. Mr. Vance, stand up. Julian stood up slowly. His face had lost all color. Explain to me, said the judge, how spending $8,000 at a jewelry store protects your mother. Explain to me how $15,000 trips are for her benefit. Julian opened his mouth, but no sound came out. His lawyer whispered something in his ear. Julian cleared his throat. I thought the money was for family use, he stuttered. For all of us. That money is your mother's pension, responded the judge with a cold voice. It is not a family fund. It is the livelihood of a 64-year-old woman who worked all her life. And you spent it on personal luxuries while she wondered how she was going to eat. Julian lowered his gaze. He had no answer. He couldn't justify the unjustifiable. The judge turned to me. Mrs. Vance, stand up, please. I stood up with trembling legs. Arthur gave me a discreet squeeze on the arm. Tell me in your own words what happened the day you discovered you didn't have access to your account, said the judge with a softer voice. I took a deep breath. I was at the grocery store, I began. I had filled my cart with the basics. Simple things, food, medicine. When I tried to pay, my card was declined. I had to leave everything there and walk out empty-handed. The humiliation was terrible. My voice broke a little. Arthur handed me a glass of water. I drank a sip and continued. I called the bank and they told me only the account holder could make changes. My son. The son I raised alone. The son for whom I worked 3 jobs. The son to whom I gave everything I had. He had cut off my access without even telling me. And what did you do after? That asked the judge. I almost called him. I admitted. I almost begged him to explain, but then I realized it wasn't a mistake. He knew what he was doing. He was punishing me. He was controlling me. He expected me to come pleading, but he didn't do it. I didn't do it, I said with a firm voice. I wasn't going to give him that satisfaction. The judge nodded with what seemed to be approval. He turned to Julian. Mr. Vance, sit down. Julian dropped into his chair. He looked destroyed small. The judge reviewed more documents. I see here that you also lent $12,000 to your son 3 years ago for a house down payment. Is that correct, Mrs. Vance? Yes, Your Honor, I confirmed. He promised to pay me back in 6 months. He never did. And do you have any document proving that loan, a signed contract. I shook my head ashamed. No, I trusted his word. He was my son. The judge looked at Julian sternly. Mr. Vance, is it true that your mother lent you that amount? Julian hesitated. His lawyer whispered something urgently. Finally, he nodded. Yes, it's true, and I intended to return it. Another silence. My things got complicated, murmured Julian. You couldn't, or you didn't want to, said the judge. Mr. Vance, let me be very clear. What you did is not only morally reprehensible, it is legally questionable. Cutting off an elderly woman's access to her own pension, spending those funds on personal luxuries, and then having the nerve to say it was to protect her that borders on financial elder abuse, a serious offense in this state. Julian's lawyer stood up quickly. Your Honor, my client is willing to reach an agreement to restore Mrs. Advance's access immediately to compensate her for any inconvenience. Arthur stood up. With all due respect, Your Honor, a simple restoration of access is not enough. My client demands compensation for the improperly spent funds. She demands immediate repayment of the $12,000 lent, and she demands that her name be removed from any joint account with Mr. Vance to prevent future abuse. The judge considered this. Mr. Advance, stand up again. Julian stood up with difficulty. He looked about to collapse. Do you have the financial capacity to compensate your mother for the funds you spent from her pension? Asked the judge. Julian looked at his lawyer desperately. I would need time. I don't have that amount liquid right now. How much of your mother's pension did you spend in the last year? Asked the judge, reviewing the documents. Approximately $40,000 according to these records. Money that should have been for her sustenance. Julian did not answer. His wife behind him looked pale, finally understanding the magnitude of what they had done. The judge took off his glasses and looked at both of us. I am going to take a 15-minute recess. When I return, I will give my decision. I strongly suggest that both parties consider a settlement in this time, because if I have to issue a ruling, Mr. Vance, I assure you that you aren't going to like the result. He got up and left the room. We all stood up. Arthur turned to me. You are doing perfectly, Mrs. Eleanor. Stay firm. On the other side of the room, Julian's lawyer was speaking urgently with him and his wife. I saw how they gestured, how they argued in furious whispers. Then Julian got up. He walked slowly toward our table. Arthur and Caleb tensed, ready to intervene if necessary. But Julian didn't come with aggression. He came with defeat. Mom, he said with a hoarse voice. His voice sounded strange, as if he hadn't spoken that word in a long time. I looked at him expressionlessly. I said nothing. I just waited. I need to talk to you alone. Please. Arthur was about to object, but I raised my hand. It's okay. We went out into the hallway. We stood facing each other, my son and I united by blood, but separated by an abyss of pain and betrayal. I'm sorry, he said finally. Tears began to form in his eyes. I'm so sorry, Mom. I don't know what happened to me. How did I get to this? I looked at him in silence. Part of me wanted to hug him. Part of me wanted to tell him everything was okay, but it wasn't. And I wasn't going to lie. You know what you did to me, I said, with a calm but firm voice. You didn't just take the money. You took my dignity. You made me feel like I was worth nothing, that I was a burden. You waited for me to come crawling to beg you. Julian sobbed. I didn't mean to. Things got out of control. You had control, I responded. Control over my money, control over my life, and you used it to hurt me. How can I fix this? He asked desperately. I looked him straight in the eyes. You are going to restore my access right now. You are going to pay me the $12,000 I lent you within 6 months, or you will sell whatever you have to sell, and you are going to compensate me with $20,000 for the funds you spent from my pension. Or we go back in there, and I let the judge decide, and I assure you he will be less generous than me. Julian palled. $20,000. Mom, I don't have it. Then sell it, I said sharply. Sell your luxury car, sell your jewelry, sell what you bought with my money. You give me 6 months for the $20,000 and 6 months for the $12,000. Or we see each other in court. You decide. Julian wiped his tears. His hands were shaking. Okay, I'll do it, I promise. Your promises mean nothing to me anymore, Julian, I said with sadness. But legal documents do. Arthur is going to prepare an agreement. You are going to sign it, and if you breach it, you will lose much more than money. We returned to the courtroom. Julian spoke with his lawyer. When the judge returned, Arthur announced that we had reached an agreement. The judge listened to the terms. He nodded with approval. That seems fair to me. Prepare the documents. I want them signed before you leave this building. An hour later, everything was signed and notarized. Julian avoided my gaze. His wife ignored me completely. I walked out of the courthouse with my head held high. I had won not just the money, I had won my dignity back. The days after the hearing were strange, silent in a different way. It wasn't the heavy silence of loneliness and abandonment I had felt before. It was a silence of peace, of quiet victory, of knowing I had done the right thing. 2 days after the trial, I received a notification from my bank. My access had been completely restored. I opened the app on my phone, and there it was, my account, my money, my control. There were $11, $200 in the account. It wasn't all that should have been there. Julian had spent so much, but it was a start. And with the payments he would have to make eventually, I would recover what belonged to me. The first thing I did was transfer all that money to my new personal account, the account where only I had access, where no one could touch a penny without my permission. Then I closed the joint account with Julian forever. That afternoon, Margaret came to visit me with a cake she had baked. She sat with me at my small kitchen table and looked at me with those wise eyes that had seen so much in life. You did it, she said simply. You reclaimed your life. Yes, I responded, feeling tears threatening to come out. I did it, but it feels weird, like I won something, but I also lost something. You lost the illusion, said Margaret softly. The illusion that your son was who you thought he was, and that hurts. It always hurts. But it is better to live in painful truth than in comfortable lies. She was right. I had been living in a lie for years, pretending Julian still loved me, pretending his coldness was temporary, pretending things would go back to how they were before. But now, I lived in the truth. And although it hurt, it was also liberating. Caleb continued visiting me regularly. He took me to places I had never had the courage to visit alone, to the art museum, to the theater, to free concerts in the park. He showed me there was life beyond the pain, that there was beauty beyond betrayal. One afternoon, he took me to a small cafe overlooking the river. We sat on the terrace while the sun set, painting the sky orange and pink. Mrs. Eleanor, I have to tell you something, he began with a serious voice. My heart raced. What's wrong? I've been thinking a lot about all this, about how you helped me years ago, about how I could help you now. And I realized something. Life is a circle. The kindness we give returns to us sometimes in ways we never imagine. I smiled. I always believed in that, although these last few months made me doubt it. But it's true, insisted Caleb. You gave me shelter when I had nothing. And look now, I could give you back some of that when you needed it. That's how the universe works. Kindness is never lost. His words touched me deeply. He was right. I had spent so many years giving everything to Julian, hoping he would give it back to me. But the universe gave that kindness back to me through Caleb, through people who owed me nothing but chose to help me anyway. 3 weeks after the hearing, Julian made his first payment. $5,000 deposited into my account. No message came with the deposit, no note, no additional apology, just the money. It was enough for now. I used part of that money to pay Margaret back the $150 she had lent me when I needed it most. She tried to refuse, but I insisted. "You helped me when no one else did," I told her, putting the money in her hands. "Let me do this, please." She finally accepted with tears in her eyes. "You are a good woman, Eleanor. Don't let anyone make you believe otherwise." With the rest of the money, I did something I never thought I would do. I bought new clothes, not secondhand clothes, not old and worn clothes, new clothes that made me feel beautiful, that made me feel alive. I also allowed myself small luxuries, a subscription to a movie platform, new books, fresh flowers for my apartment, simple things that filled my life with color. One morning, while drinking coffee by my window, watching the street, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. I hesitated before answering. "Hello," I said cautiously. Grandma responded, a small voice that made my heart stop. It was Mia, Julian's daughter, my 9-year-old granddaughter whom I hadn't seen for almost 4 months. "Mia," I whispered, feeling tears spring instantly. "Baby, how are you? I miss you, Grandma," she said with a trembling voice. "Dad won't let me visit you. He says you are fighting, but I don't understand why. I just want to see you." My heart broke into 1,000 pieces. "I miss you too, my love, so much." I took Dad's phone. When he was in the shower, she confessed, "I don't have much time, but I wanted to hear your voice. I wanted you to know that I didn't forget you. I could never forget you either," I told her, weeping openly now. "You are my treasure, my beautiful girl. Will you come to my birthday next month?" she asked hopefully. "I'm going to be 10. I don't know if your dad is going to invite me, honey," I answered honestly. "I don't care if he invites you or not," she said with a determination that surprised me. "I want you there. It's my birthday and I decide who comes. I have to hang up Grandma. Dad just got out of the shower. I love you. I love you too, my sweetheart, so much." The call ended. I sat with the phone in my hand crying. But this time, they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of love. My granddaughter hadn't forgotten me. She still loved me. She still needed me. And that meant not everything was lost. 2 weeks later, I received an invitation in the mail. An invitation handmade with colored crayons to Grandma Eleanor from Mia. "My birthday party. Please come." Inside was a note in the messy handwriting of a 9-year-old girl. "Grandma. I told Dad that if you don't come, I don't want the party. He said it's okay for you to come. Please come. I miss you a lot." I called Caleb immediately. "I need a favor, whatever it is," he responded without hesitation. "I need help buying the best birthday gift for a 10-year-old girl, and I need the courage to face my son again." Caleb laughed. "The gift we can get easily, and the courage, Mrs. Eleanor, you already have it. You just need to remember it." On the day of Mia's birthday, I got ready carefully. I put on one of my new dresses. I did my makeup. I did my hair. I wanted my granddaughter to see me radiant. I wanted her to know that her grandmother was okay. Caleb accompanied me. He insisted on being present in case I needed moral support. We arrived at Julian's house at €3 in the afternoon, exactly as the invitation said. The door was open. There were balloons and decorations everywhere, kids running and laughing. And there in the middle of it all was my Mia. When she saw me, her little face lit up like a Christmas tree. "Grandma!" she shouted, running toward me. I caught her in my arms and hugged her with all my strength. She smelled like strawberry shampoo and cake. She felt warm and alive and perfect. "You came," she sobbed against my shoulder. "I thought you wouldn't come. Nothing in this world could have stopped me from coming," I whispered in her ear. "Nothing." Julian appeared in the doorway. He looked at us uncomfortably. His wife was behind him with an illegible expression. Eleanor said, my son, with a tense voice, "Thanks for coming." "Thanks for allowing me to come," I responded with polite coldness. Mia took me by the hand and dragged me inside. She showed me every decoration. She introduced me to all her friends. She made me feel as if I were the guest of honor. During the whole afternoon, Julian avoided me. We didn't speak beyond forced pleasantries, but it didn't matter. I hadn't come for him. I had come for my granddaughter. When they blew out the candles and cut the cake, Mia looked for me among all the guests. She smiled at me, and in that moment, I knew this was enough. I hadn't recovered my son. Maybe I would never recover him, but I hadn't lost my granddaughter, and that was more valuable than any amount of money. At the end of the party, when the guests left, I helped clean up despite the protests of Julian's wife. Mia stayed glued to me the whole time, as if she feared that if she let go, I would disappear. When it was finally time to go, Mia hugged me tight. "You're going to come see me again, right? You're not going to disappear again. I will come," I promised her, "I swear. Now that I know you want me here, nothing is going to stop me." Julian walked me to the door. Before I left, he spoke in a low voice. "Mom, I know I have no right to ask you for anything but thank you. Thank you for coming." Mia has been sad for months. Today was the first time I saw her really happy. "She shouldn't pay for our mistakes," I responded. "Children should never pay for the mistakes of adults." "You're right," he murmured. "Listen, I know things between us are never going to be like before. I understand. I accept it. But Mia needs you. So if you want to visit her, you are welcome always." I nodded. It wasn't a full apology. It wasn't a reconciliation, but it was a small bridge over the abyss that separated us. I left that house feeling different. I hadn't recovered my son, but I had recovered something more important. I had recovered my dignity, my strength, my life, and I had kept my granddaughter's love. And that was everything. It has been 6 months since that day in court, 6 months since I recovered my life. And now, sitting on the balcony of my apartment, with a cup of hot coffee in my hands, watching the sunrise paint the sky with colors I didn't stop to appreciate before, I can say with certainty that I am a different woman. Julian kept up with the payments. Not all on time. Some arrived weeks late, but they arrived. The $32,000 he owed me between what was lent and what was stolen were deposited into my account during these months. The last payment arrived a week ago without a message, without an additional apology, just the money. And that's fine. I didn't need his words. I needed justice, and I got it. With that money, I did something I never imagined I would do. I invested in myself. I hired a financial advisor, a colleague of Caleb's, who helped me open a savings account with good interest to plan my future, to ensure I would never depend on anyone again. I also fixed up my apartment. I painted the walls a warm color that makes everything feel cozier. I bought new furniture to replace the old and worn ones. I hung pictures that make me smile every time I see them. I turned this place into a real home. My home. Not a place where I simply existed waiting for someone to remember me, but a place where I live fully. Caleb is still part of my life. He comes to visit me at least once a week. Sometimes he takes me to new places. Sometimes we simply sit and talk for hours. He tells me about his projects. I tell him about my small daily victories. There is a genuine friendship between us that I value more than words can express. A month ago, he introduced me to a woman named Cecilia Bennett. His mother, a 70-year-old lady with a contagious laugh and a life story that made me cry. She too had gone through difficulties with her children. She too had had to learn to set boundaries. She too had had to rebuild herself. We became friends immediately. Now we get together every week with Margaret to drink tea and share our lives. 3 women who understand the pain of being forgotten mothers. 3 women who decided not to let that pain define us. My relationship with Julian remains distant. We see each other at Mia's birthdays, at school celebrations, where she participates on important dates. We are cordial, polite, but the trust that once existed between us is broken. And honestly, I don't know if it will ever be repaired. But I have learned to be at peace with that. I have learned that I cannot force anyone to love me the way I need to be loved. I have learned that some relationships, even blood ones, have to transform. And sometimes that transformation means distance. It means boundaries. It means protecting your own heart. Mia, however, is my light. I see her twice a week, Wednesdays after school and Saturday afternoons. Julian brings her to my apartment and picks her up a few hours later. During that time, it's just her and me. We cook together. We do crafts. We read books. We talk about her dreams. She tells me things she would never tell her parents, her fears, her hopes, her worries about school, and I listen to her with all my attention. I give her advice when she asks for it. I hug her when she needs comfort. And I tell her every day that she is loved, that she is valuable, that she is enough. Because I want her to grow up knowing something I forgot for many years, that her value does not depend on what others think of her, that her dignity is inherent, that she deserves respect and unconditional love. Last week, Mia told me something that made me cry. We were baking cookies when suddenly she stopped mixing the dough and looked at me very seriously. "Grandma, when I grow up, I want to be like you," she said. "Like me?" I asked, surprised. "Yes, strong, brave, capable of standing alone even when things are hard. Dad told me a little bit about what happened. Not all the details because he says I'm too young, but I know you fought for yourself, and that is very brave." I hugged her tight, feeling my heart expand in my chest. "You are already brave, my love, more than you think. I have started doing things I always wanted to do, but never allowed myself." I signed up for a painting class at the community center. I discovered I have a certain talent for landscapes. My paintings aren't masterpieces, but they fill me with joy every time I finish one. I also started writing not just in my private notebook, but stories. Stories about women like me, women who were forgotten but found themselves, women who rose from the ashes of their pain and built something beautiful. Cecilia convinced me to share one of my stories at a writing group for seniors that meets at the library. I was terrified, but I did it. And when I finished reading, there were tears in the eyes of several people. They told me my story had touched their hearts, that they saw themselves reflected in it, and I realized something powerful. My pain wasn't just mine. My story wasn't unique. There were thousands, maybe millions of women like me. Women who gave everything for their families only to be discarded when they were no longer convenient. Women who deserve to be heard, to be validated, to be honored. 2 weeks ago, I did something I never thought I would do. I donated $5,000 to a shelter for elderly women in abandoned situations. Women who didn't have the luck I had, who didn't have a Caleb appear in their lives, who didn't have an Arthur to fight for them. When I handed over the check, the shelter director hugged me with tears in her eyes. "You don't know how many lives you are going to change with this," she told me, "but I did know because someone changed mine. And now it was my turn to do the same for others." Yesterday afternoon, I was watering the plants on my balcony when the doorbell rang. I opened the door and there was Julian alone, without Mia, without prior notice. "Can we talk?" he asked with a soft voice. I let him in. I offered him coffee. We sat in my new living room with an uncomfortable distance between us. "Mom," he started and then stopped. He cleared his throat. He tried again. "I've been going to therapy since the trial," my wife insisted. "And I've been working on a lot of things." "I'm glad," I said sincerely. "The therapist made me see things I didn't want to see. How I treated you, how I used you, how I took for granted everything you did for me. And I want you to know that I am ashamed, deeply shamed." "It's okay," I said, although I wasn't sure it was. "No, it's not okay," he responded with a broken voice. "Nothing I did is okay. I treated you worse than a stranger, worse than anyone. And you are my mother, the woman who sacrificed everything for me." Tears ran down his face now. "I don't know if someday you can forgive me, and I would understand if you can't, but I needed to tell you that I'm sorry truly, and that I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to be better, to be the son you deserved from the beginning." I said nothing for a long moment. I just watched him cry. I watched the man he had become finally facing what he had done. "Julian," I said finally, "I don't know if things between us will ever be like before. Honestly, I don't think they can be. There are things that, once broken, cannot be completely repaired. But I appreciate your apology, and I appreciate that you are working on yourself." He nodded, wiping his tears. "That's all I can ask." He stayed for another hour. We talked about superficial things, about the weather, about Mia, and her school performance, about his work. It was strange, but not terrible. And when he left, he hugged me. A clumsy and uncomfortable hug, but a hug nonetheless. I don't know what the future holds for our relationship. I don't know if we will ever be close again, but I know that I am going to be okay, regardless of what happens, because I finally learned the most important lesson of my life. My value does not depend on how others treat me. My dignity is not subject to anyone's approval. My life belongs to me, and I am enough. I always was. This morning, I woke up with the sun coming through my window. I made my favorite coffee. I sat on my new balcony and I smiled. I smiled because I am alive, because I have a roof over my head that I paid for with my own effort, because I have food in my pantry and money in my account, because I have true friends who value me, because I have a granddaughter who loves me unconditionally. I smiled because I survived. And not only did I survive, I was reborn. I am Eleanor Vance. I am 64 years old, and my life is just beginning. To all the women reading this who perhaps see themselves reflected in my story, I want to tell you something. If someone makes you feel invisible, if someone discards you as if you were worth nothing, if someone abuses your kindness and your love, remember this. You are valuable. You matter. And you deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. Don't be afraid to set boundaries. Don't be afraid to defend yourself. Don't be afraid to stand alone if necessary. Because sometimes the greatest strength is not in enduring it, is in saying enough. And you reading this now tell me, have you ever felt like someone tried to erase you from your own story? Did you ever have to fight for your dignity against someone who was supposed to love you? Did you ever rise from the ashes of betrayal and discover you were stronger than you thought? Let me know in the comments, because our stories matter. Our voices deserve to be heard, and together we are unstoppable. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being here. And always remember, it is never too late to reclaim your life. It is never too late to bloom. It is never too late to be who you were always meant to be, with love and respect.